Hey everyone, we're Red Donkey Projections. I'm Eric and we have Lucas as always.
Hey everyone.
Today is December 29th, 2020. Today we will be talking about the polls, the very infamous polls. We will be talking about the states where the polls were most off, and we will be talking about how they should really be used in the future. We're going to be using both presidential race and the Senate race.
Absolutely. We got to talk about a little bit how off the polls were in these elections. And with that being said, let's get right into it. All right, Eric, why don't you start by talking about the biggest error, I think. Well, no, that's a lie. There was a bigger one. Wisconsin.
Yeah, and before I even talk about Wisconsin, just like a general remark, I've heard people say that like the real loser of this presidential election was the polls. And not only us, yes, we're going to admit some fault to this, and like us and other outlets have really relied on polls. And we have been saying that, yes, it's not our biggest indicator, but sometimes, we did use them quite a bit. Then they ended up being not so accurate, specifically in the Senate. That was quite the surprise. So let's talk about Wisconsin. Right before the election, Wisconsin was polling 8% for Biden. That seems unreal to some people because we know what the outcome was, which was very, very close. Like less than 1% close, or maybe around 1%, I think. And this is showing 8.5. And I remember there was one poll that was showing Biden up by 17 from an A+ pollster. That was clearly an outlier. We saw that from the beginning. But the fact that the real outcome was 17 points or maybe 16 points less than that poll kind of is a concern. And for the future, I feel like everyone, us and everyone else, should use the polls as a general picture. We shouldn't really be using them that much for more statistical and quantitative data and application. It should be used more as a general picture. It's either someone's really ahead, the other opponent's really ahead, or it's really close. But
yeah, and I actually agree with you a lot on this.
Yeah, and Lucas just quickly pulled up that A+ ABC News WAPO 17-point poll. You want to take a look at it?
I completely agree with you on this. I think that in the future, we're going to rely a lot more on other sources, demographics, early voting turnout, demographic trends, partisan trends. We're going to look at those a lot more than we weighed polls in this election. Because I remember watching, I forgot who it was. It was on TV. I forgot the name, but he ran, I think it was Sabato Cristobal. It might be a little bit off, but he talked about how us humans always like to have a definitive number, quantitative data. And that's really hard to do with polling. You got to weigh things correctly. You've got to poll the right people. You've got to make sure they're telling the truth, which I think was one of the issues in this election. And I think that taking all this into account, one lesson we can take away from this election is we got to rely on other sources other than just polling. We're going to weigh polling much less in our future predictions. And you'll see that with our earlier video we made today with the Georgia runoff elections. We're going to start looking at a lot more things and factors and indicators other than just polling. And again, Wisconsin, 8 points, won by 0.6. And it wasn't only in 2020 this was off. 2016, they had Hillary Clinton leading the polls by 6.5 points. In the end, Donald Trump won that state in the largest margin of the 3 Rust Belt states that he carried, which were Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin.
Yep.
And one of the reasons we think that the polls were off was either one, people weren't telling the truth when they received the call, or two, the undecided voters said undecided when they weren't undecided. So as a result, many of these undecided numbers here ended up splitting to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and exactly what Lucas just touched on, I also wanted to talk about. Why are the polls so off? Yes, they can't, or we don't expect them to be on the dot, But why are they this off? And Lucas just named 2 of the theories, right? We don't actually know. These are just theories that are pretty logical and realistic as to why this is happening. The fact that either someone lies when they're asked, or, there's that shy person who doesn't pull at all. So, this is a very gray area. But in the future, maybe it was just with Donald Trump and with the, the attributes and the features of this particular candidate and who he was maybe skewed the polling a bit. But we don't know if this trend is going to continue in the future.
Absolutely. And you look at 2018, the congressional polls there, they actually were not that bad. Most of the races that we were expecting ended up going a certain way that we did think would go, with the exception maybe the Florida races and maybe Max Rose winning in New York 11. Check out that video we made today. But I think that one thing is for certain, Donald Trump has broken the polls. They have not been off this much, I don't think, in quite a while. But anyway, that's Wisconsin for you. Another state that they were really off in was Florida. This one, we did rely on other sources. We talked about the early voting here. We talked about turnout. And we immediately saw how low Democratic turnout was in Miami. And guess what we saw? Biden only won Miami by 7 points, when Hillary Clinton won it by, 20, 30 points? It was insane. And good. Honestly, I think we did a good job not fully relying on the polls here. We did not think that Biden would win Florida. We did put this one as tilt-R at last moment. And these polls were 5 points off. And at one point in the summer, Joe Biden was leading by 7 points. Obviously, that all did whittle down in the end to just a 2.5 point lead. At the end of the day, he still lost the state. The polls were incorrect in the state of Florida. Heading down to Michigan. Michigan was probably the most expected state to go to Biden that would be flipped. Unsurprisingly, it was the greatest margin of the 3 states. Michigan went by 2.8%. Pennsylvania went by 1.2%, and Wisconsin went by 0.6%. So Michigan, we did see this one coming, that it would be the greatest margin. We did not think it would be as slim as 2.8 points. We definitely didn't think a 7.9 point victory, but we were expecting a little bit more than just a 3-point win, essentially. And I think the polls definitely were off here. And that's not to say that Trafalgar got anything correct. Trafalgar got this really wrong. They had Trump at 3 points. They handed 3 points again. So I think that what went wrong for the presidential elections was, Donald Trump on the ticket there. You had the undecided voters who split for Trump overwhelmingly. And you also had the fact that some people might have lied to the pollsters. All right, let's now head into the Senate polls. And this is a little bit different now since Donald Trump was not on the ticket for the Senate election, but you still got to remember, Donald Trump was on the top of the ticket. And there's no state that was more off than the state of Maine. Eric, why don't you start talking about this?
Yeah, Maine was a pretty huge shock. I will rehash this story again. I was watching all the elections go out and the results. And I was looking at Maine. And I was getting pretty suspicious. I give Lucas a text. What's going on? He's like, oh, these are just early numbers. First district will flood in pretty soon. And what ended up happening is that Susan Collins won. And she didn't just win. She won by 8 points. 8 points. Look at these polls. Every single poll here showed Sarah Gideon, the Democrat, who was the Maine House of Representatives and was a pretty favorable candidate, up by, a pretty respectable margin. Yes, there were some outliers, and this is already August 20 of 2019. Getting more recent to 2020, Gideon is always up somewhere between, on average, on 5. 5 to 7, maybe closer to 5. And the fact that Susan Collins, who is one of the most unpopular senators right now, winning this race was a huge shocker. And it just doesn't sit right with me how wrong these polls were. And once again, why were these polls so wrong? We have no idea.
Right, we can only speculate. We only have certain theories that we can go off of. Regarding these polls here, we were a little bit suspicious when we saw, Gideon only up by 2 points, 1 point with these A pollsters, and we only saw her up with Emerson by only 2 points. And quite frankly, we kind of just brushed those off like, oh, they're probably just outliers. Clearly, they weren't. And they were indeed actually underestimating Sarah Gideon here. And you look at these numbers, there was like almost no undecided vote. So we can only speculate on why Sarah Gideon ended up losing this election. Another state we were pretty I don't want to say confident, but the state of Montana, we were expecting a Steve Daines victory. Did we expect it by 10 points? No way. Now, we often compare this race with the Tennessee race in 2018. If you don't know, in 2018, Marsha Blackburn, the at the time, the representative from Tennessee, was running against former Democratic Governor Phil Bredesen, who was very, very well known, very popular in his term. And when we were, well, we didn't have our channel yet back then, but personally, I was expecting, a Marsha Blackburn victory by probably around 8-9 points. And what happened was Phil Bredesen lost by 8-9 points, even though he got a Taylor Swift endorsement. He didn't end up winning, but I was a little bit off on a tangent there. But the point is this: we were expecting Tennessee to be a huge margin for Marsha Blackburn. It's Tennessee, very, very Republican. They almost never have any Democratic officials, statewide officials there. Montana's very different. Montana, they have one Democratic senator, John Tester. They have a Democratic governor, Steve Bullock, who ran this election. Steve Bullock, very, very popular, lost to the sitting incumbent here. So what did we get off here? I think the polls were definitely very, very off. We looked at everything. Some polls showed Bullock up 1 point, 1 point. Daines up, a couple points. We brushed this one off as an outlier. We were expecting a lot closer of a race, and we did not expect this to end up being a like the 2018 Tennessee Senate. We were expecting, a 3-4 point victory, not a 10-point victory. So we were very, very surprised by this, and I don't know what else to say about how we're going to trust these polls in the future from any of these states we discussed today. One final example, we do want to talk about North Carolina. Eric, if you want to discuss it, go ahead.
Yep. And this was also another huge surprise to me personally. Tom Tillis was elected in a red wave year, and Cal Cunningham seemed to be a pretty decent, adequate challenger to Tom Tillis. He was leading in the polls by, once again, for North Carolina battleground, quite a healthy margin. There was one scandal that he was in regarding sexting, and we kind of brushed it off because it wasn't really political. It was more of a personal scandal, and we really didn't think this late in the game that it would have quite the effect that it clearly did, because Tom Tillis ended up winning the Senate race. We did not think that the Democrats would end up losing this state, but they did. Let's look at the polls. Let's look at some more highly rated polls. Cunningham +3. That seems like a pretty fair thing to assume, because they were also pretty consistent. Marist College maybe was a bit of an outlier of having Cunningham up by 10, but ever since we started the channel, throughout the summer and into the fall, Cunningham had a pretty healthy lead. And the fact that it didn't end up happening like that in the election kind of baffles me. I guess it really is just like this part of the Republican vote that doesn't voice out their actual, their political positioning, but they do put it on the ballot, and therefore that's why the Republican wins. And that was pretty prominent throughout a lot of races.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with you on this. And I do want to say, though, North Carolina, every single poll showed Cal Cunningham ahead, just like Maine. Now, one key difference is North Carolina is considered more of a toss-up state. It's more of a Republican-leaning state, to be quite honest. Maine, on the other hand, is very, I don't want to say very, but it's pretty Democratic. Yes, the second district is pretty Republican, but Joe Biden won the state by 10%, and Sarah Gideon won it by around 7% as well. Or I don't know why I said it as well there, but it was very shocking. every single poll showing Cunningham up, every single poll showing Gideon up. And heck, we even made a video in August talking about how Cunningham was up 12 points in some of these polls, 12, 13 points, and he still lost. So at the end of the day, what do we say? Lesson learned from this this experience, we're going to trust a lot less in polls, and we're going to take into account a lot more different data points. And with that being said, that is the end of the video for today. Thank you all so much for watching. If you like this episode, please hit the like button. If you like our content, please subscribe. We'll see you in our next episode tomorrow. We hope you enjoyed our 3 episodes we released today.
See ya.